So we're going to start. The ceasefire went into effect on Sunday morning, local time, and as was mentioned, we did a special broadcast on Sunday. So if you haven't seen that, check that out. But this first video we showed on that day, and this is the handover video that 𝐓𝐿 released immediately after the ceasefire happened. This is the exchange of the first three prisoners, first three captives being released. But you can see in this video immediately 𝐓𝐿 in the streets. You can see Gaza City. This is downtown Gaza City. This was supposed to be destroyed. This group's not supposed to exist. These people are all supposed to be ethnically cleansed from the north, and none of that is true. And you can see it in this video clearly. This is the Red Cross delivering the first three captives and signing over their papers. So everything that you're going to see on this show has been published between last episode you saw us last Thursday the 16th and today is January 23rd. You can see him signing over there to the Red Cross the official certificates to match with the prisoners that were being exchanged. And of course, this deal has been on the table for more than a year. What we're seeing is the humanitarian release that could have happened in November 2023. This has been confirmed by everybody who is involved in the negotiations. The negotiations have not changed since that time. So there was no concessions made. Between November 23rd, the numbers of prisoners have only gone up in the exchange rate, as Abu Ubaidah said at the time. The number, when Israel said they were going to return to war in November 2023 and not continue with the humanitarian exchange, Abu Ubaidah made it clear that the price for the prisoners was going to go up. But the parameters of this deal have been in place since that time. So 1 year of genocide led to no surrender, led to no concessions, led to no change in the principles of the agreement from 𝐓𝐿. So if we look at number 2, you can see here, this is the signing over of the paper itself, which just says acknowledging the receipt of the Israeli prisoners, I, the representative of the Red Cross, received from the 𝐓𝐿 brigades. And this is not theater. This is signing over the documents. And these documents are critical because they match with the prisoner exchange deal that was made. And part of the concessions in these deals, part of the deal was that the Palestinians would not be rearrested. So these kind of documents, signing off on these documents, are not just theater. This is actually happening as protocol. Of course, there was also in these deals the female captives. They're civilians. They, according to 𝐓𝐿, should have been released the day after October 7th. They weren't the target of the October 7th raid. They didn't intend to hold these civilians. They believed that they would be exchanged immediately. Yahya Sinwar visited them on October 7th, on the morning of October 8th, and said they would be returning. Their guards said they would be returning immediately. These were not intended to be people part of a prisoner exchange 15 months later. That was Israel's decision to leave them and to carry on with a war. And Israel believed with its goals that through violence, they could return the prisoners. And that is not what happened. So the destruction of Gaza, the genocide, the crimes, didn't change anything about this deal. And that's important to say. This is Yahya Sinwar's deal that was originally negotiated. So I just wanted to show you that official signing off there. If we look at number 3, you can just see in the streets presence immediately of 𝐓𝐿 in the streets, and a bunch of them are holding Israeli weapons, captured Israeli weapons from soldiers either in this battle or in the 2014 battle. But they were the ones that those weapons are what 𝐓𝐿 brought out to the street to show. So I wanted to show you that. But as Ali pointed out, from the first minutes all of this presence, the resistance presence, the government presence, the municipality presence in the streets was immediate, was total. It was never destroyed. It was never dismantled. The battalions of 𝐓𝐶𝐞 were not dismantled. We'll see that as we go through this program. And Hamas was immediately able to um, provide security on the aid routes for the influx of aid. The aid was not captured by Israeli-backed bandits. The aid was delivered to where it was supposed to be in large numbers. The deal calls for 600 trucks a day, and that happened in the first 3 days. There was 1,500 trucks across the border. 50 trucks are supposed to be fuel each day that should get up the paramedics, the hospitals, the civic infrastructure from that fuel. So that's a key part of the deal. And of course, the tents, 200,000 tents are supposed to come in these first days as well, which was also something stipulated in the agreement from the beginning. If we look at number 4 here, just to give you a sense, I always start with the map. So I want to keep this going so that people understand what we're talking about. The Netzarim corridor, we've spent 14 of the 15 months talking about the Netzarim corridor and what was going to happen with it. That's in the middle there, dividing northern Gaza from the south, and the other key corridor is the Philadelphi corridor along the Rafa border. The Netzarim corridor has already begun to be dismantled. It has to be dismantled by day 7. Along the coastal road. So that should be happening by Saturday. Today's Thursday. So within the next 2 days, the coastal road should be open. And there's a full military withdrawal of Israeli forces from Rafa, where they were operating, from Jabalia camp, Beit Lahia, and Beit Hanoun. That's where the Israelis were operating. Those troops have left. And so that's significant. And on Saturday, there'll be 4 women soldiers, 4 IDF soldiers, Israeli military soldiers that will be released, and their exchange rate is 50-1. And they are for life sentences and for long sentences. And I just want to point this out. I pointed it out on the show on Sunday, but 𝐓𝐶𝐞 fights as a joint operations. They fought as a national movement. They represent a national army. And in the prisoner exchange, that's how they represent the prisoner exchange too. So there's 735 in phase 1 of this deal, 735 political and security prisoners that will be released. Israel calls them security prisoners. We'd call them political prisoners. And the breakdown of those 735 is 345 𝐓𝐶𝐞 and Hamas members, 229 Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades and Fatah members, 67 Islamic Jihad Saraya al-Quds members, 19 DFLP Abu Ali Mustafa Brigades members, and 6 DFLP National Resistance Brigades members. So the release is not for Hamas only. They're not. They're all focused on a national project, and that was how they fought. I brought your attention to that numerous times over this 15 months. And when you see the actual documents and who it is that exits prison in these exchanges, you see that national representation as well. Because in prison, they're in a national movement in the prisons. They work together in their groups in the prisons. But the understanding of the hierarchy of who was going to be released, the deans of the prisoners, the people with the longest sentences, those people are prioritized in the release based on the national movement. So if we just zoom in here, this next map here, number 5, is what it looks like in Gaza today. So that's the overall map, and this is from a different angle, but you can see this is the IDF's map showing the buffer zone and then Netzarim corridor, and then on the far left of the screen you have the Philadelphia corridor. So this is how things look as of today. There's a buffer zone of 700 meters around Gaza, and the Netzarim corridor is being in the process of being pulled up. I'll show you maps on those a little later, but these are the maps as they are today. So we will follow this whole ceasefire and prisoner exchange, because there's many elements to it. They are interwoven, and they all build on each other. So phase one is 33 humanitarian, it's called, release. These were the people that it could have been released in November in the humanitarian release, but Israel chose not to. Phase two is the soldiers, and there's 67 of those, or in that category, soldiers, reservists, in that next category, and that's when things start to get a little less clear than they are in stage one. If we look at map number 6, we can zoom in on Rafa with a Philadelphia corridor here. As Dunya talked about, people immediately went back to Rafa on the first day of the ceasefire. Um, and the let's do number 7. Number 7 will show the Philadelphia corridor map, the basics. So you can see there, we were talking about the Philadelphia corridor and how wide it had gotten over the course of the war. And once Netanyahu in the summer prioritized the Philadelphia corridor over all other aspects of the exchange, we were talking about how wide the corridor is. Here it is 700 meters, and in the bottom 1100 meters. Israel's allowed 3 positions in the south that are 1100-meter buffer zones, and the rest is 700-meter buffer zones. Right now, everything that's crossing into Gaza is crossing through the Kerem Shalom crossing in the bottom corner of that map that you can see. And then the next one up is the Rafa crossing, and ultimately the Rafa crossing, that is the one that goes to Egypt. Kerem Shalom goes to Israel and Egypt, but Egypt through Israel. And so the key is getting the Rafa crossing open, because the Rafa crossing is where wounded patients who need to seek medical care outside of Gaza will be released through Rafa. And that process is a little bit less known. The withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor doesn't happen until the end of the 42 days. Phase one is 42 days, and the Philadelphia corridor is supposed to be abandoned between day 42 and day 50. So it is in an ambiguous period that still needs to be negotiated on. Phase two will be begun to be negotiated on February 16th is when that begins to be negotiated. The rest is for phase one that we're seeing right now. And this week, 𝐓𝐿 released an operation, a significant operation that happened in Rafa. If we look at number 7C, we can see, do we have the first from the municipality map? Sorry, my bad. This is a municipality map just to show how the government is able to immediately respond to the situation and provide a map for people returning to Rafa, where the danger zones are, how thick the corridor, the Philadelphia corridor is, and where areas that you cannot go are. This is the Gaza government, the Gaza municipality, the Rafa municipality in this case, immediately able to respond to the moment of the ceasefire with a map that's updated to give to people. So there's no collapse of the government. There's no collapse of the resistance. This is not going to be a surprise to anyone who's been following our program for the last 15 months, but this is seeing it for your own eyes. This is what people in Rafa were given when they arrived back to Rafa. So Rafa municipality operating just like they are in Gaza City and in each of the cities throughout Gaza. So good. I wanted to get that one in. I almost skipped it. But 7C, this is 𝐓𝐿 operation in Al-Shabura camp that was released. This is an operation from January 13th. So this video came out after the ceasefire, but this operation takes place in the week preceding. You can see 𝐓𝐿 has eyes on an Israeli position in Shabura camp. The Israelis have basically destroyed the entire camp, as you can see, except for the one building, more or less the only building standing. And the Palestinians here, 𝐓𝐿 is using the tunnel to scope, to reconnaissance this building. There's the classic Israeli blanket hanging in the one window where the soldiers are using it, which is their adaptation from soldiers in a window, is to put massive conspicuous blankets into the window that they are. We're watching 3 teams here setting about with their 𝐓𝐿 built thermobaric warheads. They're PG-7VR thermobaric warheads, which are uniquely Gazan, made in the case of the Yasin 105 with a precursor charge that you're going to see how they work here. First unit, so there's 3 squads here. First team is going to go to an elevated firing position. Second unit here and the third unit are accessing the attack site through a tunnel. So they've been able to surveil their position continuously using tunnels throughout the war. This is days before the last day of the war, and they're still able to operate in their tunnels. That's how they've been able to fight this war through the whole time. So this unit's going to come out at ground level. So we're going to have 2 shooters, 1 tunnel borne, 1 ground level, 1 elevated, firing on this Israeli troop position that the Qassam field report from January 13th said there was 25 troops using this position. And we saw the armored vehicles around it. And so we're seeing here a triple thermobaric ambush on a single building, which I'm not sure we've seen 3 hits on a single building in the war. So this operation was a significant operation right at the end of the war. The ability of the Rafa brigade to fight till the end of the war, despite the fact that Netanyahu said they were dismantled and defeated in July, when he was talking about the Philadelphi corridor as being the oxygen for the resistance, which it is not. It may have been decades ago, but it is not anymore, because you can see that thermobaric warhead right there was built in Gaza. That weapon that's being used against the Israelis did not come through the Philadelphia corridor. It was built in Gaza, and that's why they've been able to fight with these weapons throughout the war. So now you're seeing the elevated shot. And the thermobaric warhead is a fuel air ignition, and it's used as an anti-personnel weapon because you can see it just fills the room with a flame. It's a deadly, it's a destructive weapon that's being used here. And we're seeing 3 of them being used on a unit of 25. The Israelis did not claim casualties in Rafah on this day, which has been something we have seen throughout the war. This is a gunfight going on. We don't have audio in audio track is not in there, but there's a gunfight going on. Then these fighters are back underground in the tunnel. They have already rigged up a minefield of IEDs, and they're waiting underground for the reinforcements. The 2 Namur, they describe it in the field report, 2 Namur troop carriers. We don't see it here, but that makes sense because they have a 25-man unit in this building. So they're sending rescue operations to Namur troop carriers, and they detonate the minefield underneath it. So a significant operation in Rafah on the final days of the war, 6 months after the Israelis said that they were defeated in Rafah. So obviously absurd claims that we've seen throughout the war and we've been tracking throughout the war. The reason why it can take a few days for a video to be published out of Rafah, there's many operational factors that could lead to it. And we've seen that before. We saw it in Shujaiya during the second Shujaiya invasion. Qassam kept all of the videos and communications from Shujaiya until the withdrawal happened. And we're going to see that later on the show, also in Beit Hanoun. So let's take a look at the Netzarim corridor, where Israel has been for 5 days now pulling up bases on the western coast, on the Al-Rashid coastal road. They've been pulling up their bases that were always temporary bases. We followed this from the beginning. I remember more than a year ago, it was in November, we started talking about the Netzarim corridor and what Israel was doing. This was a logical place for Israel to attempt to cut the Gaza Strip into fingers. It was a long-term plan that goes back to the beginning of the occupation of Gaza in the early 1970s. And it was an area where they used to have a settlement that was in the middle of Gaza, specifically to cut Gaza in half. So the ability for the Israelis to take the Netzarim corridor was never a major military accomplishment. Holding it wasn't a military accomplishment either, because as you can see, the cities are a distance away from it. And even though they destroyed and widened the corridor, holding the corridor was not a military accomplishment. Keeping the corridor forever may have been, but that's not what's happening here. And this agreement stipulates that Israelis are not getting their soldiers back. They're not getting their people back if they're in the Netzarim corridor. If we look at the next map, you can see a bit better what I'm talking about. Um, so that's what this is going to look like by Saturday. The coastal road is going to be completely open, Al Rashid Street. People will be able to walk on foot from the south to the north, which was a key stipulation, a key principle of the negotiations led by Yahya Sinwar and Halil al-Hayya right from the beginning. And Hamas's conditions were an end to the aggression, a withdrawal from the corridors, and a return home, a return to the north. People must be allowed to return home. And the fact that they're not being inspected and they don't have to go through a checkpoint on the coastal road is also a victory for Qassam in these negotiations. Israel wanted to turn the Israel didn't want to let people return to the north, but then when they did allow people to return, they wanted to do it through a massive checkpoint that they had set up in the Netzarim corridor that I reported on back a year ago that they were setting that up. That installation has been removed, and people are not being inspected. And anytime the reason why people don't want checkpoints, which is, I mean, it's obvious why people don't want checkpoints, but the reason why they don't want checkpoints is that that's where you're captured. That's where Israel can capture people. Obviously, as we've seen throughout the war, random people, and you could be taken away and disappeared and taken into torture camps in the south of Israel, as more than 1,200 Palestinians were taken out of Gaza, who are being released also in this first stage in the humanitarian release. 735 security prisoners and 1,200 Gazans who were detained after October 8th and had no charges against them, had no charges against them. They were just taken from Gaza as bargaining chips and tortured in Sidi Taman and these terrible camps in the south of Israel. So to not have a checkpoint, that's a serious victory also for Palestinians. What you see on the right hand side there, that's how this will be until day 22. Day 22, the Salahuddin Street will be open, which is the main highway that runs north south in Gaza. And that's what you can see on your map there. Israel sets up a checkpoint 1,100 meters in from the fence. It's not a border, but in from the fence that demarcates the edge of Gaza. And there are going to be searches that are not done by the Israelis. Cars traveling on this road, cars will be allowed to travel on this road on Salahuddin, and they will be inspected by a third party. It's still being worked out right now between the UAE and Egypt and possibly American private security companies. We'll keep reporting on that because that has not been finalized. But that gives you an idea of what's going on with the Netzarim corridor. It's already, as of Saturday, will be half empty and people will be walking from the south to the north. And that will be a very celebratory day for Palestinians who were driven from their homes. And the ability to return to their homes is a principle that was not given up by Qassam, not in any amount of genocide, in any amount of destruction. Those tenets stayed firm, and that's going to be something that history reflects very positively on Qassam and leading these negotiations to not waver on their principles. And also a serious defeat by Israel, whose objectives were to return the captives through violence and pressure, to destroy Qassam, and to destroy the Hamas government. That was the third. And the fourth was Gaza would no longer be a threat to Israel, which is obviously not the case. Very much Gaza is a threat to Israel. You have thousands of angry young men who have watched their fighters defend their territory heroically and want to join 𝐓𝐶aM. We know that American intelligence estimates have 𝐓𝐶AM being larger today than before the war started. I don't doubt that. And in the coming months and years, that will grow even more. So Gaza is a threat. Gaza believes that they can win the war. They believe they can go through the most brutal hell on earth and come out the other side without ever having given any concessions to the Israelis. And that's something that will leave Gaza a threat to Israel going forward. So Israel failed on all four of its principal goals, and the Palestinians succeeded on all four of their principal goals. Netzarim corridor is a good example of that. Let's look at number 10, because the entire time Netzarim corridor was under attack, this is happening. This is an operation from Tel El-Hawa. Tel El-Hawa is in the southwest of Gaza City. I lived in it for a while in Tel El-Hawa, so shout out to Tel El-Hawa here. These fighters are planting IEDs, improvised explosive devices. They're not really improvised. It's kind of a misnomer at this point, but you could see them planting those with pressure plates, which means they don't have to detonate them by hand. When the weight of the armored vehicle passes over, you can see there the Merkava tank. When it passes over there, it sets off the charge underneath, as it did there, blowing away camera 2. And we're going to see it from camera 3 here, because they have 4 cameras on this, 4 spotters on this operation. There's the tank burning from camera 3, from spotter number 3. So these operations, when the Israelis were in the Netzarim corridor, in the expanded Netzarim corridor, they're being hit. They're pointing there to pieces of a vehicle. Not clear if it's the targeted vehicle. They identify it as the targeted vehicle, but ruins of Israeli armored vehicles, which we are starting to see all over Gaza, and we will especially see in the north when people return full on to the north. Remnants of destroyed Israeli armored vehicles that we've been documenting for the last 15 months. Abu Ubaidah talked about 2,000 targeted vehicles, which I think is a conservative number. 𝐓𝐶AM's numbers are rarely, if ever, inflated, even on the smallest field report. So, and that's something we've pointed out to all throughout the war. So number 11 is a sniper operation. This is also in the Netzarim corridor. This made the corridor difficult for the Israelis to operate in. It was the reason why they had to continue widening it to protect their soldiers. Again, we've edited this video so that it matches community guidelines at YouTube. Which we always do. We did that for the prisoner exchange as well. I edited out the prisoners being exchanged, which is, I think, proper. We, in the Israeli media, they put the captives, both Palestinian and their own captives, they put them all over the media. And I think that that's not the best principles. I think international law principles for one thing, but just basic decency, we're not going to do that. So as long as the YouTube community guideline censors that are watching this right now know that we've edited this video to match your guidelines. So let's move to the north. The Netzarim corridor under attack, constantly shrinking. People soon going to be moving north. The next time you see us, we will be reporting on people moving north. And the end of the war was it was marked by 100-day siege of Jabalia, where 5,000 people were killed, 9,500 were wounded, 2,600 were detained for some point. We watched them dismantle all 3 hospitals and attack Kamal Adwan and Beit Lahia. But the Gavadi Brigade and the Nahal Brigade both exited Gaza on Monday. They left out through the border exits through the northeast side of Beit Hanoun. And they had to speak in the media about their failures in Beit Hanoun. The IDF said, "We are not faltering in Beit Hanoun," because they took so many casualties, at least 15 casualties in the final week of the war alone. And the numbers are almost certainly an undercount, because the numbers of wounded were scores each day. One day there was 30 wounded. And so I think this is another example of Israel underselling their numbers. And I'm going to show you some of the Qassam operations there. But the Israeli military said that we are not faltering in Beit Hanoun because they were getting hit so hard. They said, we are cleansing the area thoroughly, this time once and for all. And of course, 3 days later, the ceasefire came in. So they didn't cleanse once and for all Beit Hanoun. They didn't cleanse the north. None of their genocidal plans came to fruition. And they came because of the resistance in the north. If we look at number 12A, we have here Abu Hamza Fayed. He is the commander of the Beit Hanoun battalion, and he went out and met people who were coming back to their destroyed homes. And he gives an address where he says that Israel failed to achieve in its military goals because it didn't achieve its objectives, and that is a defeat in the truest sense in both military and non-military principles. He says, we saw Gaza emerge dignified and defiant. We saw Gaza emerge dignified and defiant in victory, he said, walking to those people. So the interesting thing about Abu Hamza, obviously led the fight in Beit Hanoun for heroically for these 15 months. But if we look at the next slide here, 12C, Israel told us in May that they had assassinated him. And not just assassinated him, they claimed in May during the invasion, the second invasion of Jabalia, that their underground Yahalom, under their tunnel unit, their special forces unit, killed him in a tunnel, in combat in a tunnel. That was during the May operation. Here's what they said. The IDF said the commander of Hamas's Beit Hanoun battalion was killed by Israeli forces in a tunnel in the Jabalia area, the military says. Hassan Fayed, Abu Hamza, was responsible for many anti-tank missile attacks launched against our troops during the war, the troops that were in their neighborhood during the war, as well as launching artillery at the Gaza envelopes, the IDF said in a statement. The IDF says that Fayed was killed in a tunnel in a joint operation carried out by the 98th Division and Special Forces of the Air Force and Elite Yahalom Combat Engineering Unit. His killing is, quote, part of the 98th Division's fighting above and below ground to find and destroy tunnel networks and eliminate terrorists, the military said. So, not true. Didn't happen. Completely faked story. And this is also, interestingly, the part of the story that, if people remember back in May, Abu Ubaidah came out in the middle of the night and gave a speech saying that we, Qassam, had captured a soldier in a tunnel underground that we had lured there. So Qassam lured these IDF forces to a tunnel by leaking information that there was bodies of captives in this tunnel. And they went down in this tunnel and fought, and one of the soldiers was seen on camera being dragged into the tunnel. We still haven't seen maybe we'll see that person be released because there's video of him and we will be able to identify who he was. So we'll stay on that story. But because of that perceived failure of the video coming out with one of their soldiers being dragged into the tunnel, and one of the first, if not the only, time where there was actual combat in the tunnels that Israel claimed combat in the tunnels, it's clearly a fake story because it's not Abu Hamza, and Abu Hamza was not in Jabalia. He fights in Beit Hanoun, and the Beit Hanoun battalion stayed in Beit Hanoun, which is how we know that these operations were able to take place. If we look at number 13, this is fighting in territorial units is how Qassam survived this entire war. And how you know that they were never defeated, that they were never dismantled. They were not guerrilla forces running around harassing Israeli troops. They were fighting in their territorial battalions. This is the Beit Hanoun battalion, who released yesterday all the operations that they didn't release during the last 2 weeks of the war, when the death toll that we got from the last 2 weeks of the war was strictly from the Israelis. We didn't have field reports from Qassam saying that what the operations were. Well, we got those reports yesterday, and just to give you a summary, there was 6 Al Ghul sniper operations. There was 11 thermobaric warheads versus troop positions. So, like we saw in Rafa, there was 11 operations like that. There was 4 IEDs versus tanks, and one of the incidents separated the turret from the hull of the tank, and that was known in the Israeli media as well. Qassam confirmed that in their field report. There was 3 IEDs versus command jeeps. That sign says there, that's the ambushes of death, and it's a series. So it said, stay tuned, because they're going to show us the rest of these operations. But this, to give you an overview of them. So there was 3 IEDs versus command jeeps, and the Israelis were vexed by that because their jeeps were getting hit in convoys, in multi-vehicle convoys, where the IED was detonated against the command vehicle, not against any other vehicle except the command vehicle. So the Israelis, in their internal reports, Army radio and whatnot, was saying, how do they do this? Um, how do they know? How do they keep knowing to hit the command jeeps? And I read these testimonies from before, but just to give you a briefing on it, an embed from Channel 12 got testimony from the soldiers who said, in Beit Hanoun, who said, we are fighting in an environment monitored by cameras by the militants. They've planted explosive devices in every alley and are activating them from inside the tunnels. The underground network is fully operational. We cannot see them with the naked eye. For a week and a half, there's been no direct identification of any militants while we're getting hit. They have completely planted Beit Hanoun with huge amounts of explosives and remnants of our Air Force bombs. Every alley, every intersection is filled with state-of-the-art cameras, 360-degree thermal cameras, and just the soldiers wigging out because they don't understand why, after all this time, Beit Hanoun is rising up on the last days of the war, and smoking them and dealing with them in a way that looks like the first day of the war. So there was 3 command jeeps. There was IEDs versus 3 booby trap troop positions, 3, 2 operations with IEDs versus D9s, Yassins versus 2 vehicles, and rockets and artillery on 11 straight days. So these operations, when they say on that sign that you see, on that graphic that you see on the screen saying coming soon, we're going to hear about these operations. So maybe I'll save them till we watch the video, but they match with the Israeli reports pretty well. Like on the 8th, in a combined operation in Beit Hanoun, northern Gaza, Al-Qassam fighters sniped and killed an Israeli sniper and his spotter. Subsequently, they targeted the same force with 5 thermobaric anti-personnel shells, causing significant casualties. The enemy acknowledged the death of 2 soldiers and the injury of 10 others. And there's just a whole page of these reports that I think we're going to see videos of many of these. On the 8th, Al-Qassam fighters set up a well-prepared ambush along a predicted enemy route, destroying a tank commanded by an armored battalion officer with a high explosive IED, causing the turret to detach and killing all inside, including the officer. They then targeted the reinforcements that came with an anti-personnel IED, inflicting further casualties in the minefield. And these are the reports that the Israelis were claiming: 5, 6 killed, and 10, 15, 20, and like I said, one day 30 casualties. So these reports will match them up when these videos come out, presumably next week. But interesting story from Beit Hanoun. And like I said, this is not unusual to have these reports come out after, for operational reasons. They don't want to risk doing it, sending them out in the moment of the battle. Number 14 is also to show that 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿 was in here in Beit Hanoun as well. It's not just Qassam. This is 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿 operating in Beit Hanoun with their Qassam rockets, their 10-kilometer Grad rockets that say made in Palestine. This is 𝐓𝐴 𝐤𝐿's. Beit Hanoun is Qassam City, named after these rockets, because this is where the area where they're launched from over the past 20 years. At Israeli settlements in the envelope and military bases like the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 military base that's right on the Gaza border. The 𝐓𝐡𝐞 military base is the target of this operation that we're looking at here. And on October 7th, people may remember hearing about 𝐓𝐶𝐞. That was the place where frogmen commandos, naval-born commandos from Qassam, landed on the beach and stormed the 𝐓𝐶𝐞 military base and took prisoners who will be exchanged in phase 2 of the release, should that go ahead. So um, interesting developments showing these videos after the ceasefire, but really paint a picture of why the Israelis were so upset about their failure in Beit Hanoun, and to show the commander of the Beit Hanoun battalion, who they said they killed 6 months ago. We didn't say he was killed. There was no confirmation he was killed. The fighters didn't say he was killed. Qassam didn't say he was killed. Fighters referred to him during battle, as well as the Beit Lahia commander, Wael Rajab. They both were spoken of, so we didn't think that they were dead. But to see him come out and give that speech yesterday was embarrassing, as the Israeli media reported it. And just one final note from the resistance report. As part of the prisoner exchange between Hamas and Israel, the Ansar Allah group has released the crew of the Galaxy leadership that was boarded and captured by them and the Yemeni armed forces early in the war as part of the blockade of Israel, of shipping to Israel. They mostly Filipino crew. They got gift bags too, like the Qassam prisoners. They got Yemeni jewelry and other souvenirs from their hosts, and they were sent out on a chartered flight by Oman, who negotiated the deal as part of the ceasefire and prisoner exchange deal. And Ansar Allah said that they will continue their blockade on Israeli shipping through the Bab el-Mandab until the blockade of Gaza ends. So the blockade of Gaza is supposed to end in phase 3 of the prisoner exchange and ceasefire deal. We'll see if we get that far. Netanyahu has promised that we won't get that far. Maybe we'll talk about that in the group discussion. That is the resistance report for this week, the first week of the ceasefire.